El grado 4 que el grado 7, pues no es lo mismo. El del 7 está en silla de ruedas y no va a poder expresarse además. El del 3, ¿con quién trabajamos? Y si tiene un Parkinson avanzado o tiene una enfermedad de cuerpos de Levy que tiene trastorno cognitivo y también tiene Parkinson, ¿es persona mayor? Yo les pediría que a partir de ahora, para las siguientes ponencias, cuando oigan enfermedad de Alzheimer, tengan flexibilidad mental para interpretar que estamos hablando de un modelo donde lo de no es tan importante si el diagnóstico de Alzheimer es preciso, sino que lo importante es que tiene un trastorno de la función cognitiva y unos años y unas discapacidades que pueden venir de los años y del Alzheimer. Yo suelo insistir hasta la machaconería que esa persona con Alzheimer tiene necesidades de fisio y de terapia ocupacional producidas no por el Alzheimer, sino por su artrosis, por su disminución de la movilidad, por otras patologías, además del Alzheimer. Porque no tengo yo todavía muy claro cuál es el papel del fisioterapeuta en la enfermedad de Alzheimer. Otra cosa es en un paciente con Alzheimer, ahí sí. Entonces, el mayor, el anciano, el viejo, la persona mayor tiene una disminución de la reserva funcional, es más vulnerable ante la enfermedad, no es capaz de reparar los daños habidos, eso que decía el profesor Gil, el desequilibrio, la ruptura entre el daño y la reposición, y tiene entonces esa mayor tendencia a la discapacidad. Y ahí, en su contexto, en su familia, antes de la institucionalización, unos cuidadores que van a ser sobre todo la familia, y eso también está feminizado, por razones que no vienen al caso, va a tener unas necesidades. Una persona que ha trabajado mucho tiempo y que sigue trabajando en ello, en este asunto, es la persona que van a escuchar ahora. Karen Harrinson es enfermera. Como ven en el programa, tiene muchos años, no que tenga muchos años, sino que tiene muchos años de experiencia en la atención justamente de este tipo de personas en el domicilio. También tiene una gran experiencia, por ejemplo, en terminales y en situaciones que no tienen nada que ver con el tema que hoy nos ocupa aquí, pero que forma parte de su background. Karen tiene, por eso se la ha invitado, para que nos comente cuáles son los aspectos más relevantes desde el punto de vista de políticas y pautas de actuación en referencia a atenciones en el entorno familiar, en personas con demencia, pero vuelvo a insistir, pidiéndoles, y lo digo no desde la especialidad, sino desde la atención a las personas, en esa pluralidad a veces diagnóstica. Algo que nos ayuda siempre cuando hablamos de una enfermedad en abstracto es referirla a un paciente en concreto. Decía Jiménez Díaz que no hay enfermedades y que la misma enfermedad es distinta en un profesor de filosofía o en un agricultor. Y el Alzheimer pasa lo mismo. Y el contexto de la familia, de la situación del paciente, de qué patologías tiene asociadas, es lo que les pido, esa flexibilidad para entenderlo. Karen Harrinson, cuando quiera.
Buenos días. I'm afraid that's my sum total of Spanish, so you're going to have to bear with me and put on your headphones. But it's an absolute delight to be here, to be asked to talk about person-centred care. As I assume I've been introduced, because I didn't have my headset on, my background has been explained to you, and I'm what's called an admiral nurse, and in the United Kingdom, admiral nurses are, as the title explains, nurses that have specialised in caring for families affected by dementia. And whilst I'm going to be talking about the principles of person-centred care, what I will do is pull in strands of what an admiral nurse's role might be in different situations. And you might ask why I've chose this particular picture as the start of my talk, because it clearly shows two perhaps distressed older people. You could arguably say that these are two distressed older people that have dementia. You could also argue that it might be my parents' reaction when 3 weeks ago I had my head shaved for charity. Who knows? But I think sadly in reality, whilst I'm going to talk to you about person-centred care, we still know that a lot of people with dementia do actually experience a lot of distress and care that they receive, whoever it be, not always person-centred care. This is me when I had hair, so as you can see I did look very different. So I thought I'd start with that. And what I want to look at is the principles of person-centred care, but I also want to look at person-centred care not just within the family setting, what it might mean for the individual, but also within different care contexts. Because I'm aware that not all of you are informal family carers, but some of you are students training or in different professions with dementia, or indeed already practitioners. I don't quite know what your backgrounds are. But I think that person-centred care applies across the board. It applies to all of us, and certainly in the UK now, we're realising that you cannot deliver person-centred care unless you're actually treated in a very person-centred way yourself. And that actually applies to all healthcare professionals, all social care professionals too, that unless you're actually treated with dignity, with respect, as a person yourself, then how can we possibly hope to actually treat others as individuals? And I think that this actually sums it up really in terms of individuality. And I think that there are a lot of assumptions made about dementia and people grouped and defined by the disease. But I think that really when you see one person with dementia, you've seen one person with dementia. So it reinforces that we're all individuals, and whilst it's fine for me to espouse to you the principles of person-centred care, the underlying aim is to see people as individuals. And I don't know whether you're aware of the work of Tom Kitwood. Tom Kitwood's work spans back several decades now, and sadly he's died. But I think that he framed it within this being his seminal text, when he actually amplified what it is to be an individual with dementia. And in healthcare particularly, I've probably been guilty myself over the past decades of nursing to actually define people by their diagnosis, by their condition. So do we see the person with dementia, or do we see the person with dementia? And I think just the subtleties of how that's actually phrased within the words, within semantics, again, hopefully shows us what it is to be an individual. Now, when we look at person-centred care, it's not a single intervention. I can't give you a magic text that said, this is person-centred care, follow this text, and you'll be successful. And it's not non-pharmacological, it's not non-cognitive, it's all of these things. But I think what is important is that person-centred care it provides us with a set of guiding principles for our actions in the field of dementia care. And you could actually say that these are fundamental principles that can guide your practice in whatever care setting you're in, and with whatever people, with whatever conditions. And it enables person-centred care with dementia to be within the context of relationship with others. Now, I don't have any fancy slides on graphs and statistics and forest plots, and as your previous speakers heard. But what I do have is what Tom Kitwood looked at as being perhaps equivalent to a mathematical equation, and it's to encourage people to see dementia not just in the context of the biomedical model. Whilst the biology of dementia is very important, we are more than the composite of our dendrites. We are more the composites of our brains and different parts of our bodies. So this sort of mathematical equation encourages you to look at the neurological impairment, the brain damage. There's no getting away from it. It is a damaged brain, which does lead to lots of other, it has implications. But I think you should also look at an individual within the context of their health. And as we've heard this morning, that older people don't just come with a neat package of a disorder. They often come with many comorbid conditions. And certainly, as I assume that my biography was explained, my particular research and study interests are in the end-of-life phase of people with dementia, and the comorbid conditions and the impact of those on end-of-life care. And it's also the biography, who that person is, what was their life like, what's their life history, and their personality. And whilst there are some changes in personality and a perceptive loss of some elements of personality, nevertheless, there are elements of the personality that remain intact. And also the social context, the environment within which that person lives, within that person is being cared for. So they are composite of all of these aspects, and I'll go on to some of them in more detail later. We're very bothered in the UK with what are the barriers to providing person-centred care. And Tom Kitwood particularly built on the work of another psychologist, Carl Rogers, when he looked at the malignant social psychology, and that sounds a very fancy statement, but what that actually does is it defines the behaviours that a person with dementia might be subject to by any one of us, whether that be a family member or a professional carer, and often it's unintentional and without malice. So the malignant word does sound as though it's sort of malicious, but it's often unconscious incompetence, really. And some of those behaviours might be outpacing a person with dementia, just going too fast for their cognition, for their ability to understand what's going on. It might be silent treatment. It might be actually doing something with or for a person with dementia, but not actually socially engaging with them. Or it might be disrupting their train of conversation, their train of thought, and interjecting. It might be objectifying them, treating them in a non-person-centred way as an object and tasks associated to care for that object. And there are many more. There's about 10, 12 malignant social psychological behaviours that can actually affect the well-being of a person with dementia and actually generate ill-being and provide non-person-centred care. So it's a major barrier that we have to be aware of our own actions and our own behaviours. I think lack of time, and certainly we're starting to see that quite markedly in the UK within acute hospital care, that nurses can't actually provide person-centred care because they claim they have no time. So people with dementia do need more time. Lack of knowledge of the person, who they were, what makes them who they were, some of their history, and a lack of understanding of the principles of person care, which in a way is quite sad that we have to be told, we have to be taught how to treat somebody as a person, as an individual. You almost assume that surely is that inherent in social human relationships. Poor communication, and I'll go on to communication a little more in a moment. And care that's physically or spiritually impoverished, and environments that are impoverished or poor. But I think that it's always important to acknowledge that there are enablers to person-centred care, and we perhaps harness more of these than we actually give ourselves credit for. I think having skills and knowledge of dementia, we talked about earlier about raising awareness, and raising awareness within the general public is the first step to that. So we cannot expect people, family members, to provide good person-centred care unless they have some knowledge about dementia, some knowledge about the skills, and we actually give them the skills. And certainly that's one of the very basic underpinning elements of the Admiral nursing model, in that we work with all people that families affected by dementia to tritate, to drip in elements of knowledge, upskill them, adapt their knowledge and skills according to what the needs of the family affected by dementia are at any one time. But it's also about having any person that comes into contact with a person with dementia having a basic awareness level of knowledge and skills. It's no good admitting a person with dementia into an acute hospital for maybe some chemotherapy for their cancer or acute affection, and the nurses and the multidisciplinary team not having a sufficient knowledge of dementia to provide person-centred care. And it's providing opportunities for the staff or anybody working with dementia to actually reflect on their experiences and to build upon them. And that has to be done within the context of organisational support. And I think that such organisations that are organising this event today really have grasped what it is to improve the lot of people with dementia and actually work with everybody to move that forward. But it's principally working in a an environment of mutual support and respect, and actually valuing the person with dementia as a human, as an individual, and working stridently to meet their needs. And it's about generating physically and emotionally enriched environments to actually meet that. But I think that one thing certainly that's coming out of my research is that when people with dementia start to think of their care, think of their disease, think of what they want for the future, they want to feel safe. They want to feel safe in our hands. But I think that that collectively can only be achieved if we actually do provide good carer support. They come as a unit. You cannot divide an individual out from their social context. So carer support is of primacy really within this. And we go back to Tom Kitwood. This is a picture of Tom Kitwood. And he said that person-centred care was a process by which service providers, and you could argue that family carers are service providers, particularly if we're wanting the big society to actually adopt the care of people with dementia. And it's about their responsibility to maintain the personhood of the person with dementia. And he said that personhood is a standing or a status that is bestowed upon one human being to another, irrespective of whatever disease group, whatever disability you have. And in the context of relationships and a social being. And it implies recognition of individuality, and it's respect and trust. And a couple of years ago, I had a case where I was supporting a family where the woman was 55-year-old and had young onset dementia. She had no other physical health problem, and we supported her to die at home with some social care going in. And the husband was a social scientist by background, so he was very articulate, and he was quite distressed at some of the carers that came in. Some were very person-centred care, some were not, some just did the task and went. And he said that my wife didn't lose her personhood. She didn't lose her personhood like she lost her door keys on many occasions, or her handbag on many occasions. She didn't just lose it along the way. It was taken away from her. At times it was taken away from her, and yet at other times her personhood was given back by carers that provided individual care. We're listening more and more to the voice of the person with dementia, and I don't know whether there are any people with dementia here today, but certainly in the UK we're starting to include people with dementia in events like this. And Christine Bryden is a person with dementia. She's progressed to the point where now she can no longer write and present. But she said, how you relate to us has a big impact on the course of our disease. You can restore personhood, you can give us a sense of being needed and valued still. And she said that there was a Zulu saying, which a person is only a person through others. So give us reassurance, give us hugs, support, and a meaning in life. And I think it's really important that we actually not only listen to the voice and the experience of family carers, but also to the person with dementia. And if we go back to that mathematical equation I talked about, what's evolved from that is an enriched model of dementia care. So it's actually looking at those elements of dementia care and actually looking at what they translate to. What are some of the interventions that we can apply? So if we look at, it's about life story, understanding the person's future lifestyle, who they were, what was their job, what were their likes and dislikes. But also my research interest area is looking at, can that person actually predict for the future what their wishes might be at a time when they no longer have capacity? It's looking at elements of personality and working with that. And health, there is much within health and ill health in an older population that can actually affect how they present to us, particularly around pain and pain associated with other comorbid conditions and how we interpret that. There's a lot around capacity for doing and building upon a person's strengths, cognitive support and of their needs, and life at the moment. What's life like at the moment, and living sometimes from day to day, week to week, because life changes that rapidly at times, and providing support and a rich environment with others. And these are just some of the elements that an Admiral nurse would look at when we're assessing the needs of a family affected by dementia. So it's looking at the level and the context of impairment in the person's ability to function, plus the type of dementia. That can tell us an awful lot in how that person might behave, or actually looking at some of the strengths that we can continue to hold on to. And indeed some of the interventions that we may or may not be possible to use. As I said, health and physical fitness. Certainly I've come across an awful lot of people where they're described as having behaviours that are challenging, behaviours that are very difficult for carers to manage, like shouting out and aggression, pacing. And often I've found that they're based upon an expression of need, and very, very often that expression of need is often pain. So if we can actually address some of the physical health issues, we can actually then meet some of their behavioural issues too. And it's about gathering a person's personality and their information and their life story, because all too soon those memories will be lost. The actual implications of those memories and what that means for that person could be lost. And it's up to families, it's up to all of us to capture that and to harness that and use that in person-centred care. But I think it's also important to assess and consider the impact of the social psychology, the social context within that person. And Admiral Nursing actually provides relationship-centred care. So we don't just actually provide care for the person with dementia, but we will assess the needs very acutely of the carer or any number of family members. So it might be that the care needs of the spouse might be very different to those of children or those of a neighbour. We will work across all care settings. So it might be also that people we work with are social care staff that are working with people with dementia, and we would support them in providing the very best possible care to their clients too. So we do work with professionals an awful lot. And also we would give advice and support across many, many domains of care, person-centred care, to families and to professionals. Going back to Christine Bryden, she tells us to build upon their strengths. How they cope with the struggle into the increasing problems of thinking, of memory, of physical functioning, often depends upon how they've coped with problems and difficulties in their past life. So actually, you can actually see, and knowing about that person, how they coped in their marriage, how they coped in bereavement of other people, how they coped when they moved house, how they coped in education. What were some of the positive aspects of that, and what were some of the negative aspects of that? What can we build upon? So it's actually working with their strengths and building upon those and harnessing them in a very person-centred way. So it's about working positively with reminiscence and trying to understand what the life of the person with dementia might be like. And that is very difficult. And the only way to do that is actually to harness the information that people with dementia can give us. Now, I know that part of the programme, and certainly the prospective programme, is to look at some of the environmental issues. So I only have time to touch on some of these things very briefly. But as Admiral Nurses, we would advise on the many and varied adaptations to the home. And it might simply be taking up a floor rug that actually impedes a person's movement across the floor. So it's not always about applying something that's high-tech, but it might just be a simple adaptation, labelling a fridge as a fridge, so that you can actually maximise on the person with dementia's ability to still recognise things. And maybe a sensory garden. I mean, it might be that in a person's history they enjoy gardening. How can you maximise on that? If they can no longer get outside, how can you bring some of those elements into the house? So some of the remedies are very simple, but sometimes they just need problem solving to actually see what they might be. And ambience. I was at Madrid airport yesterday, and we were talking informally about how to make the wider society more dementia-friendly. What can we do to support people with dementia? I mean, there's an awful lot now about other disabilities and how we can have ramps and how we can have low-level light switches and things. But I was looking at that busy airport arrival lounge with many colours, many noises, announcements going on, huge amount of colours and people. That would be a person with dementia's nightmare. So if we are going to think about environments, we do have to start thinking about how to make dementia-friendly banks, how to make dementia-friendly airport lounges. We do have to go a lot further beyond that. we're all creative, and I don't just mean that we can all paint pictures, but we're all creative, we're all imaginative individuals. That's what makes us human. And I'm not going to touch on this too much because my colleague Maria Parsons will be talking about this later. But I am always amazed at how in using the arts, with using music, with using theatre, we can actually make really vital connections with people with dementia. And it never ceases to amaze me how that can be done. And I was at an event earlier in Scotland this week where there was a creative, the people with dementia had the first slot, and one of them was a stand-up comedian. And although he was reading from a sheet his jokes, he was reciting some jokes about what it's like to have dementia, and it was hilarious. It was a wonderful, wonderful icebreaker. But I think that John Killick, who I know that you've had some association with, is a poet in the UK, and he's actually doing some work around the use of humour. We all like a laugh. I mean, I've certainly had a few laughs since I've had my hair shaved. But he's actually starting to write about playfulness. And certainly when I've worked with people with dementia over the years, I've brought humour into how I interact with people, because I bring humour into how I interact with anybody. And whilst I think it's great that we can actually do this, it saddens me also to think that, do we have to write a book on how to be playful with people with dementia? If we were truly treating them as people, as individuals, would we have to write a book about how to do that? Or should we just get on with it? Life stories can be done in any way, shape or form. It could be an individual biography, and this is an image of somebody's life story. They've done it in a sort of a scrapbook way. It could be about just reviewing past events. It can be about developing and maintaining relationships, and certainly we Admiral Nurses support families to make life stories, because it's not just about that individual's life story, it's about their interactions with others along the way. So you can't have a photograph scrapbook without having some pictures of your children on the beach, or of pets, family pets, and different houses you've lived in. So it can be many, many and varied. But I think there's been some useful use of the reminiscence tool and life story work. And the first picture up above is actually a reminiscence box, which has got a person's artifacts in it, and that's actually used in an entrance to their bedroom in a care home to allow that person to recognise where they sleep. So they recognise their own artifacts, their own image, their own pictures and child's shoe from the past, and that helps them orientate themselves. So there's many varied therapeutic applications of life story work. And the bottom one are, you can get themed boxes, as I'm sure you probably have them here, but this is very typical. And I remember, looking at some of these things from my childhood, and that would remind me very much of my school days, and would obviously make way for very important interactions. And advanced care planning, because that is of my interest really. It's what do we take now, thinking about now for our future, what's important to us now and into the future. Of course, communication is a huge issue, and these are just some tips really for communicating with people with dementia. But if you look at the minimal percentage that we have in terms of how we communicate, whilst you're listening to my spoken word now, I'm communicating in many, many other ways. And I think we have to maximise on those for people with dementia. So it might be that you support family carers in how to maximise on some of those communication skills. Very important is person-centred care in care settings. You cannot deliver person-centred care in care settings unless you consider some of the elements of what it is to have dementia. And it's often seen as a Sisyphean task, and I don't know whether you know Greek mythology, but Sisyphus was a king who was condemned to push up a huge boulder up a hill, which is an impossible task. And it would roll down again, so he'd have to push it back up. And he did this for eternity. So see, there's some of the barriers that we're up against. We have a dementiaist society, and I think it's a double whammy, because we've got an ageist society and we've got a dementiaist society. We've got lack of resources. Resources are not finite, and we haven't heard much about the economics yet. But if we were to provide the absolute tip-top quality care for people with dementia, we'd bankrupt each of our countries. So it is a big society approach. But all of these things are important within care settings to providing person-centred care. So in a way, they're barriers that we need to overcome. And Dawn Brooker, a psychologist in the UK, who's taken on over the work of Tom Kitwood, really. And she coined this an acronym. I mean, everybody knows what a VIP is, don't you? It's a very important person. It's somebody who, you know, it's probably a pop star or somebody that's a royal family member. But it's about, you know, we should treat people with dementia with the same philosophy. It's about valuing that person. It's about looking at their individual needs. And it's about their perspective. Look at it from their perspective and offer a supportive environment to that. And she says the question remains is, how can we change face-to-face care for people with dementia? Where's the leadership? And the answer is with us, really. The answer, you know, gentle reader, is with you. So I think that the guiding principles for anybody are, do my actions value and honour this person? Do I recognise the unique individuality of this person? Do I make a serious attempt to actually look at my own actions and how they might appear to the person with dementia? And do my actions provide support? Do they provide humour? Do they provide playfulness? And help people with dementia to feel more socially confident and that they're not alone in this? And Tom Kitwood said the personal relationship with a person with dementia is always part of a larger relationship. They're not in isolation. They're not in some bubble that is totally immune from any communication. And it's never, ever a one-to-one relationship, and certainly never should be. So it's about the interaction with us all as individuals. And this is a pathway. I mean, I could email it to any of you, but why palliative? Well, any life-limiting condition, which dementia is, should start at the point of diagnosis. So if we're to actually prepare for the end of life, for however long that journey is, we should start at the beginning. So it should be relationship-centred. It should be from diagnosis or before to death and beyond in supporting family carers to pick up their lives again. It should be cross-cutting. It shouldn't just be confined to primary care. It shouldn't just be confined to a hospital setting. It should be across the board. It should be proactive and it should be preventative. Christine Bryden says, as we become more emotional and less cognitive, it's the way you talk to us, not what you say, that we will remember. So it's about linking emotionally. We know the feeling, but we don't know the plot. Your smile, your laugh, your touch, your empathy, it heals, it helps us to feel connected. So love us for who we are, the emotion and the spirit, and it's only you that can find us. And I just wanted to end on a very short clip, the work of a psychologist in America called Naomi Fail, who has actually used validation therapy. And it's not about bringing people to the stark reality of the here and now. It's actually making that emotional connection with them. How can I connect to this?
When people are very old and deteriorated and no one enters their world and they're just sitting there, they will withdraw inward more and more. And their desperate need for connection is all now inside. And if a person is all alone, even if they're very, very deteriorated, there's a longing for this kind of closeness. Mrs. Wilson? Hello. You want me to sit? Can you see me good? Gladys Wilson is a wonderful example of a person who is in the phase of repetitive motion, where people use movements, repetitive movements, because they don't have any more speech or very little speech, but they have human needs that need to be expressed. You're crying. You're crying. You have a tear right here in your face. You have a little pain. You want me to touch you. You're very sad. Can you see me? Is it scary? Are you afraid? And if this person sits with their eyes closed, rocking back and forth, and maybe there's a tear coming down, there's a need there. There's a little tear that's coming out. Do you feel it? You feel a little tear? If you gently use touch, and I touched Gladys Wilson for the fingertips right here on the cheek, is where the mother usually touches a child. If you touch an infant there, it looks up, and every cell remembers where it was touched by the mother. And often that person knows, even if they can't say a word at that moment, they won't talk, or they don't want to talk, but there's a communication. And that person is no longer alone. Can you let me in a little bit? You think? Just a little? You think I could be with you and Jesus for a minute? Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. I used music, because when speech is gone, music, especially with Gladys Wilson, it was religious music, because there's emotion tied to it and safety tied to it. So I used her old church songs. Jesus loves me, yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so. What I did was, when she moved, I moved with her. And when I was singing, because she didn't sing with me, so I matched the intensity of my voice to the intensity of her movement. And pretty soon, for a split second, we became one person. Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. So at one point, when she got very quiet and very peaceful, and my voice became very quiet as hers and very peaceful, and my breathing slowed to her breathing, she pulled me to her, and I moved with her. And for her, at that moment, I believe I was a symbol of her mom. Can you open your eyes now? Do you see me? Feel safe and warm? Yes? Can you sing? He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 He's got the mothers and the fathers. He's got the mothers and the fathers in his hands. He's got the mothers and the fathers in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. The breakthrough doesn't happen every time. The person will not always open their eyes and look at you. But if you keep trying, and you keep centering yourself, and really look at that person, and really mirror their movements, maybe not this time, but the next time you come, you'll have a communication. You feel safe? You feel safe? Yeah. With Jesus? Yeah. And me?
Muchas gracias, Karen. Yo creo que el nivel de emoción de los presentes ha dictado su veredicto antes de que ella nos dijera si había terminado o no. La atención es un acto de amor. El tener en cuenta todos esos principios que Karen ha comentado es básico y es algo que muchas veces no se enseña en las escuelas ni de medicina, ni de enfermería, ni de fisioterapia. pero sabemos que además de saber, hay que saber hacer y además saber estar, tener principios actitudinales que nos ha recordado perfectamente bien Karen.